Hello everybody, and welcome to some solutions for some more challenging questions that involves the Pythagorean theorem and circles as well. So this first question that we have here, we're actually asked what is the length of this line right here. This is a multi-step question. So whenever you have these multi-step questions, you always want to look back and see what is the piece of information I need in order to solve that. So if I was to solve that question, for instance, I would need to know two pieces of information. So right now, I have this line that I know, but I need to know the length of this line. So if I'm going to look at where to get the information for that line, it's actually the hypotenuse of the other triangle. So I need to run this question as two separate triangles. So I'm going to start, and because this is the hypotenuse, I'm going to label that as C for my first question. I'm going to call this guy A, and I'm going to call this guy B. And if we remember our Pythagorean theorem, it's A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So this, remember, is the square of the legs of the triangle. If we add their area together, is going to give us the area of the square off of this face of the hypotenuse. So I'm going to replace these letters with numbers. So I get 4 to the power of 2 plus 8 to the power of 2 is going to give me that C squared. And because the equal sign is here, I don't need to carry that down. It means it equals the same thing that was over there before. So 4 squared means 4 times 4, so I get 16. Remember, if you thought that was 8, you're adding or you're multiplying by 2. 8 times 8 is 64. And I get that's still going to be C squared. Now if I add those together, I'm going to get an answer of 80. Clean that up a little bit here. And that's my C squared value. But I want to find out what the value of C is, or just the length of that line. In order to do that, I'm going to take the square root of 80, and the square root of 80 is going to be 8.9. So I know that that length of the line is 8.9. I'm going to write that in there right now. So now I'm going to use a different color to indicate that I'm looking for this line right here. So I'm going to use this green in order to go and work on this other triangle. The very first thing I need to notice, though, is that the 8.9 is no longer my hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is actually the 17. So on the green triangle, that guy is going to be C. My missing side is going to be A, and the 8.9 is now the B value on this other triangle. But again, I'm going to use my Pythagorean theorem. I'm just going to use the version that lets me find the missing leg. So A squared is going to be C squared minus B squared. And so in this case, I'm going to take my C squared, which is 17, and then I need to square, minus my 8.9 squared. Well, that one should be easy because remember it was over here, it was 80. So 17 squared is 289. I'm going to minus 80, which means that A squared is 209. A is the square root of 209, which is going to be 14.5. And we're rounding here. It actually came out to 14.456.832, blah, blah, blah. But if I do my rounding when I cut off my numbers, it's going to round to roughly 14.5 units. So if we look here, oops, sorry about that. If we look there, we're going to see that that line here should be 14.5. I've got an idea that that's correct because the 14.5 is less than my hypotenuse, and we know the hypotenuse is always the longest side. So if we go now to our next question, we have this circle and triangle set up together. And in this case, what we're told is we know that the circumference of that circle is 15.84. We know that this line is the radius of the circle, and it's telling us that the leg of this triangle is 2 of my diameters. And we're trying to find out the length of the hypotenuse. So the first thing that I would do if I was attacking this question is I would actually go and say, well, in order to find that length, I'm going to need to know, oh, the diameter. And I know I can get the diameter from the circumference. So I can say typically circumference is pi multiplied by the diameter. So in order to do that the other way, in order to get diameter, I would take circumference and divide it by pi. And that will tell me my diameter. So in this case, I've got 15.84 divided by pi. That gives me my diameter. And what we're going to do is we're going to use 3.14 for pi. So that gives me a value of 5 as my diameter. Which means that 2 diameters is 2 times 5, which is going to be 10. So I know this line is 10 units long. And because this is my radius, I need to take my diameter and divide it by 2 in order to get the radius. And so that's going to give me a value of 2.5 because I take my 5 and divide it by 2. All of this sets me up to be able to use my Pythagorean theorem. Because this is the hypotenuse rather. Oops. I'm going to get my view fixed up here. Because that's my hypotenuse, I can use the typical a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I'm just going to change my ink color to help us out with that so you can see the next step. So I've got a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And again, that's going to help me find the length of the hypotenuse. So I'm going to go, a is going to be the length of my radius, which is going to be 2.5 or 2.5 squared plus 10 squared equals c squared. So I get a value here. If I work out 2.5 squared, I get 6.25 plus, 10 times 10. I know that one. That's 100. So if I add those together, I get a value of 106.25. Gives me my c squared. If I take the square root of 106.25, I get the length of c, and that works out to 10.3. And of course, we've rounded that because it has a long number there. So now I'm going to go to the third one. And our third question, again, has us looking at a circle with a square and a diagonal. And we have to look at the pieces that we need. Now, because this was a square, we know that these side lengths are all equal. And when I look at the diagram, I have the hypotenuse. But I don't have the diameter of the circle. So this is where we have to think of what we need. So if I look at this square, I know that whatever length this line is, this line has to be exactly the same. And I know typically that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Well, with this being my hypotenuse, I'm going to call 68 the length of c. So I know that if I took a squared and b squared, they would be the same values. So it's like I have two of the same number will make up my c squared. And I'm just going to do that right now. So c squared is going to be 68 squared, which is going to give me a value of 4,624. Now this is where we have to think through our question. I know that these values, the a squared and the b squared value, are going to be exactly the same because these lines are exactly the same length, which means I have two of those. So I am going to take my 4,624 and I'm going to divide it by 2 so that I can find out, well, what's the value of one of these? So that's going to give me a value of 2,312. And that, of course, is my a squared value, which means a is going to be the square root of 2,312, which is 48.1. Or sorry, 48.01. No, my apologies. 48.1. Now, this is where things get a little bit more interesting. I now know the diameter of this circle, but the question is, what's its area? So the area of a circle is pi times its radius squared. So in this case, for the radius, I need to take my 48.1 and divide it by 2. I get 24.05. So equals pi times 24.05. Oops, that got a little glitchy there. Squared. If I square 24.05, I get an answer of 578.4, and I still need to multiply that by pi. Apologies, I'm running out of a little room there. I'm going to just continue to the side. Typically I would go down. So if I take 578.4 and multiply it by 3.14, I get 1816.2 meters squared. And it's meters squared because we're looking at area. I hope that helps. Again, you can re-watch the movie, you can pause it in places, you can look it over, do one question at a time. This is how you would solve these multi-step questions. You just need to look for a way to attack it and the way to piece it together. Start with what you're looking for and look for the pieces of information you need, and then walk it back like a puzzle. I hope that helped. Have a good day.